Most people say they want a better life, but spend most of their time distracted. In this conversation, we explore the ideas from Deep Work by Cal Newport, not as a summary, but as a reflection on focus, discipline, and what it means to give your attention to what truly matters. Because in the end, your life is shaped by what you pay attention to.
That is such a heavy thought to start with, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, just think about your morning so far, just today, for anyone listening. You sit down with your coffee to tackle that one important task, the one that actually moves the needle.
Right, the big one.
Exactly. And then, 45 minutes later, you're somehow deep in a web browser, reading a completely unrelated article, checking 3 different group chats, and you have absolutely no idea how you got there.
It's like you teleported.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your attention was just entirely hijacked. So today, in this deep dive, we are breaking down the mechanics of why that happens, and more importantly, how we fundamentally rethink our relationship with our own minds.
And I think it's super crucial to set the stakes right at the beginning here, because we are looking at the philosophical weight of our attention. I mean, this isn't about giving you a list of quick life hacks.
No, definitely not.
We aren't going to sit here and talk about keyboard shortcuts or, how to organize your inbox folder so you can somehow cram 10% more emails into your Tuesday afternoon.
Right, that's just playing a losing game faster.
Exactly. We want to examine what it actually means to exist in a state of depth versus living your entire life just, waiting in the shallows. Because that feeling you described earlier, that fragmented, frazzled morning feeling, that is not a personal failing on your part.
It really feels like one, though.
It does, but it's actually a highly predictable response to a modern world that is actively trying to fracture your attention.
Yeah, and to understand why this feels so overwhelming right now, we kind of have to look at the massive shift in how the modern world values attention. There is this core concept here called the deep work hypothesis.
Oh, this is a fascinating one.
Right. It essentially proposes a massive economic and cultural paradox. It argues that 2 things are happening at the exact same time. First, the ability to perform deep work, which is distraction-free concentration that pushes your cognitive limits to their absolute maximum. That ability is becoming incredibly rare.
Extremely rare.
But second, at that exact same time, that specific ability is becoming increasingly valuable in our economy.
Yeah, it is a crazy paradox when you think about it. I mean, basic economics tells us that if a skill becomes incredibly valuable, the marketplace should naturally encourage it, right?
You would think so.
Schools should build their curriculums around it. Businesses should design their office spaces to foster it. But the exact opposite is happening. We are building environments that actively destroy the very thing that is becoming most valuable.
Why is that? I mean, if focus is empirically better for the bottom line, why is it becoming so incredibly rare?
Well, a massive reason for this is what is known as the metric black hole.
The metric black hole.
Yeah. We really have to think about how we measure the value of work. If we, go back to the industrial age, productivity was incredibly easy to measure.
Right, it was physical.
Exactly. If you stood on an assembly line, your output was tangible. You attached doors to cars. If you attached 50 doors in a day and the guy next to you attached 40, you were explicitly more productive.
It was a simple math equation. You could just put it on a clipboard.
You literally could. The metrics were universally understood. But, we don't live in the industrial age anymore. We live in the knowledge economy.
And it's a lot messier.
It's a metric black hole. In the knowledge economy, it is incredibly difficult to explicitly measure the cost of distraction versus the value of depth. The output is purely cognitive. It is totally invisible until it's finished.
Right.
So imagine this scenario. If you spend 3 hours in unbroken concentration, really thinking about a complex new strategy for your department, and then I spend those exact same 3 hours rapidly replying to 40 emails, sending 50 instant messages, and walking quickly between 3 different conference rooms, who was more productive?
Well, looking at it from the outside, the person answering the emails and literally running around the office definitely looks more productive. I mean, they are generating noise. They were visible.
Exactly. Because true productivity in knowledge work is so ambiguous, we panic. We don't have a clipboard with a door count on it. So we fall back on an industrial age mindset, and we adopt what is called busyness as a proxy for productivity.
Busyness is a proxy, just trying to look busy.
Right. If I can't definitively prove that my brain is generating value, I will prove my worth by showing you how busy my hands are. I will be constantly connected. If you send me a message, I will reply in 2 minutes flat, just to prove I am at my desk.
Like, look at me, I'm working.
Exactly. If there's an email chain, I will chime in just to say, agreed, to show I am participating. We show our value through visibility, which is, ironically, the exact opposite of what deep, meaningful thought requires.
And here is where the friction really starts to heat up, I think. Because at the exact moment that everyone in the corporate world is adopting this busyness proxy, just running around, trying to look busy, keeping their communication channels wide open, the underlying economy has fundamentally shifted.
Massively shifted.
It now heavily rewards the exact opposite behavior. I mean, to thrive right now, to really become indispensable, you must master the art of quickly learning complicated things. We are in an era of rapid technological change. The skills that were valuable 5 years ago, they're being automated today.
Which means your primary professional survival skill is simply the ability to adapt. You have to be able to sit down with dense, complex information and master it.
And learning hard things requires intense, unbroken concentration. You physically cannot learn a complex new coding language or, understand a dense analytical framework or write a sophisticated legal brief while keeping one eye on your inbox. It just doesn't work.
It fundamentally goes against human neurology.
Really? How so?
Well, let's look at the actual mechanics of learning. The science of how we acquire a new skill relies on literal, physical, structural changes in the brain. When you focus intensely on a specific skill, say, understanding a new piece of software, you are forcing a very specific circuit of neurons to fire over and over.
Okay, so repetition.
Yes, but specifically focused repetition. When those specific neurons fire repeatedly in isolation, it triggers the production of a substance in the brain called myelin.
Myelin. I've heard of that. Think of myelin like the rubber insulation around an electrical wire, right?
That is the perfect way to visualize it, yes.
Because if you have a bare copper wire, the electrical signal is going to leak out. It's weak, it's slow, it's inefficient. Right. But if you wrap that wire in thick layers of rubber insulation, the electrical signal is trapped. It travels incredibly fast and perfectly clean.
Exactly. Deep work, that unbroken concentration, is essentially the process of wrapping your neural circuits in that thick rubber insulation. When you focus deeply, you are telling your brain exactly which circuit needs to be insulated. The myelin wraps around the axon of the neuron, cementing the skill.
Making it permanent.
Right, and allowing your brain to process that specific information faster and more effortlessly in the future. But, and here's the kicker, what happens when you are distracted? What happens if you are trying to read a textbook, but you also have a group chat open and you are secretly worrying about an email you just sent to your boss?
You're firing dozens of different circuits all at once.
Exactly. You are firing neurons totally haphazardly, so the brain doesn't know which circuit to insulate. The myelin doesn't get applied effectively. The wire remains bare. This is exactly why you can spend 4 hours, quote-unquote, studying while watching television and checking your phone and retain absolutely nothing. You literally cannot learn hard things quickly in a state of low concentration. The biology simply does not permit it.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
I want to ground this in a real scenario because there is a story from the source material that I think captures the absolute terror and then the triumph of this exact dynamic.
Oh, is this the Jason Ben story?
Yes. It's about a guy named Jason Ben. So he was working as a financial consultant. Now, financial consultant sounds like a prestigious, highly cognitive job, right?
It sounds like he's doing intense math all day.
Right. But the reality of his day-to-day was essentially taking data from one place and manually entering it into Excel spreadsheets.
Ah, he was doing human spreadsheet work.
Exactly. Highly manual, highly repetitive. He joked that it was exactly as boring as it sounds. He would sit in a cubicle, pull up a PDF or a database, and meticulously copy information into Excel cells. It would take him up to 6 hours of mind-numbing labor to finish a single report.
That sounds agonizing.
Now, Jason was a smart guy. He had an economics degree from an elite college. And because he had some baseline technical curiosity, he realized that Excel had a feature called macros.
Oh boy. The beginning of the end for the manual data entry. For those who might not be familiar, a macro is essentially a way to record a series of actions in software and turn them into a single command. It's basically like teaching a ghost to click the mouse and hit the keys for you.
Right. So Jason does a little bit of research. He wires up a few basic macros, and he realizes he can automate his entire job. A process that took him 6 hours of soul-crushing manual data entry could now be executed perfectly by the computer in less than an hour. Literally just by clicking a button.
Which, if you really stop to think about it for a second, is an absolutely terrifying realization for an employee.
It is, because he just proved that his primary professional value to his company was entirely replaceable by a very basic, simple script. He had literally automated himself into
He
obsolescence.
built his own replacement.
Exactly. Yeah. And he knew that if he could do it, eventually the company would figure it out or the software would just update to include it naturally, and he would be completely out of a job. He realized with absolute clarity that he needed to increase his value to the world, and he needed to do it incredibly fast.
He needed a skill that a simple piece of code couldn't replicate.
So he decided he was going to quit his job and become a computer programmer. He wanted to be the guy writing the scripts, not the guy being replaced by them.
That's a huge leap.
It is. And there was a massive catch. He had no idea how to write code. None. And programming computers is a notoriously difficult, complex language to learn. It requires extreme logic, abstract thinking, and just an incredible amount of mental synthesis.
You need a lot of myelin for that.
You do. He needed to learn a highly complex skill very quickly to survive economically. And here is where Jason ran face first into the exact problem we were talking about today. When he sat down and tried to learn, he found he physically couldn't focus.
His attention had been totally fractured by his work environment.
Yes. He admitted that leading up to quitting his job, his brain was basically fried. He was always getting on the internet, constantly checking his email. It had become a physical compulsion.
Yeah.
He actually recounted a story about trying to research business plans for a project at his old job.
What happened?
He had a clear goal. He sat down at the computer, and at the end of the day, he realized he had spent 98% of his time surfing the web instead.
98%.
Yeah. He couldn't stay on task for more than a few minutes without feeling this overwhelming itch to open a new tab, check a social feed, look at the news.
He was suffering from the exact scarcity of attention that basically defines the modern knowledge worker. His brain had been wired through thousands of hours of bad habits to expect constant, shallow novelty.
Constant dopamine hits.
Right. And when faced with a dense, difficult textbook on computer programming, his brain simply revolted. It didn't have the myelin to support that kind of prolonged cognitive heavy lifting.
So Jason realizes that he doesn't just have to teach himself how to code. He has to simultaneously teach his mind how to focus again. He has to rehabilitate his brain. So he took incredibly drastic measures. He knew his willpower wasn't enough.
Willpower is never enough.
Exactly. If he was in the same room as a connected computer, he knew he was going to browse the web. So he locked himself in a room with absolutely no computer. None.
Wait, to learn computer programming, he removed the computer.
He did. Just physical textbooks on programming, a stack of blank note cards, and a highlighter.
That highlights just how toxic the distracting environment of a connected device can be to the learning process. It's wild.
He completely segregated himself from the source of the distraction. He would sit in this quiet room, read the dense programming theory from the books, highlight the key concepts, transfer those concepts by hand to the note cards, and then practice reciting them out loud to ensure he actually understood the underlying logic.
That sounds grueling.
He said it was agonizing at first. His brain was screaming for the dopamine hit of a refreshed inbox. But he gave himself no escape hatch. He just had to sit there with the friction.
He was doing concentration calisthenics. He was basically forcing the myelin to wrap around the specific programming circuits.
And over time, his concentration muscles actually grew stronger. The agony started to fade. He eventually got to the point where he was clocking 5 or more disconnected hours a day in that room, purely deeply focused on this hard new skill. He read something like 18 dense books on programming.
Wow.
Yeah. And after 2 months of this intense, isolated, deep work, he emerged and attended a notoriously difficult elite programmer boot camp. Now, this boot camp is designed to wash people out. Half the students didn't even graduate on time because the pace of learning is so relentless, they couldn't focus deeply enough to keep up with the curriculum.
But Jason was uniquely prepared. Not because he was naturally a genius, but because he had spent 2 months forging the specific cognitive tool required to succeed, the ability to do deep work.
Exactly. Jason not only graduated on time, he was the top student in his class. He quickly landed a job as a developer at a well-funded tech startup. And think about the economic leap here. When he quit his soul-crushing consulting job, he was making $40,000 a year. His new job paid $100,000.
That is a life-changing difference.
It is. He cultivated this rare superpower of deep work, and the economy rewarded him massively for it.
You know, if we pause and really extrapolate from Jason's story, we start to see the massive personal and economic advantage that is just sitting there waiting for anyone willing to claim it.
It's just sitting on the table.
It really is. The broader culture is practically begging you to be distracted. Just think about the corporate environments we are building. Companies are constantly pushing open office plans where anyone can tap you on the shoulder at any time.
Oh, the worst.
They are pushing serendipitous collaboration. They are demanding that you be active on social media to build your personal brand. They mandate that you have instant messaging platforms open all day, and they celebrate the people who reply the fastest. All of these trends actively, fundamentally destroy your brain's ability to focus. They basically strip the insulation off the wires.
But, and this is the crucial optimistic part of this whole idea, I think.
Yeah.
Because everyone else is succumbing to this, because the entire corporate herd is moving toward maximum distraction, the few individuals who privately cultivate the ability to go deep will wildly outperform their peers.
Absolutely. It creates an almost unfair advantage.
You don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You just have to be the only person in the room who can think about a single problem for 2 hours straight without looking at a screen. Like an athlete, right? It's like an athlete eating junk food during training.
Yeah.
We abstractly know distraction is bad, but because we can't see the immediate damage on a balance sheet, we keep gorging on it.
That's a great analogy.
But hold on, I have to play the skeptic here for a second.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because if I am an executive or a manager or just someone observing the market, there is a glaring contradiction. If deep work is empirically better for business, if it produces a Jason Ben, someone who can generate elite-level value and solve complex problems, why are these distracting trends winning out? Why do companies embrace instant messaging and open offices? Are thousands of incredibly smart CEOs just universally wrong about how work should be done?
It is a really profound contradiction. And to explain it, we have to look beyond just business metrics and actually look at sociology. There's a concept proposed by the late communication theorist Neil Postman. He wrote a book in the early 90s warning that our culture was sliding into a state he called a technopoly.
A technopoly, what does that mean?
Well, Postman drew a distinction between a tool-using culture and a technopoly. In a tool-using culture, technology is invented to solve a very specific problem. You have a heavy rock, you invent a lever to move it, the tool serves the human.
Makes sense.
But in a technopoly, the culture essentially surrenders to technology. The technology itself becomes the highest value. We stop discussing the trade-offs. We don't carefully balance the new efficiencies a tool brings against the new problems it introduces. Instead, we develop a cultural, almost religious assumption that if something is high-tech, or if it relates to the internet or connectivity, it is inherently, unquestionably good.
So the tool is no longer evaluated, it is just worshipped.
Exactly. In a technopoly, you are viewed as a heretic if you question a new technology. So apply this to the corporate world. Deep work is decidedly old-fashioned. It values craftsmanship, unbroken thought, silence, isolation.
Things that don't scale or flash on a screen.
Right. Those things aren't shiny. They don't require a monthly software subscription. They don't look good on a dynamic dashboard. So when a new instant messaging tool comes along or a new enterprise social network is pitched, businesses adopt it blindly. It feels modern, it feels fast, it feels technological.
And because of that metric black hole we discussed earlier, because they cannot easily measure the massive drop in deep cognitive output that results from everyone being interrupted every 4 minutes, the distraction is allowed to just take over.
Precisely. They see the speed of the message, but they don't see the destruction of the thought process behind the message. They have blind faith that more connectivity equals more productivity, despite literally all the neurological evidence to the contrary.
That is wild.
But again, this is actually phenomenal news for the individual listener. Because the business world is currently blinded by this technopoly mindset, they aren't going to fix it for you. Your boss is not going to suddenly mandate 4 hours of silence, which means you have the opportunity to step into that gap. You can produce elite-level value just by quietly stepping away from the noise and protecting your own mind.
So what does this all mean for us on a personal level? Because up to this point, we've mostly talked about the economic cost of distraction, right? We've talked about value and careers and output. But the ideas we are exploring go much deeper than that. They argue that the cost of a distracted life isn't just economic. It's profoundly psychological.
It really is.
It actually rewires our brains and fundamentally alters our emotional reality. And to truly grasp the psychological stakes of attention, I want to take us back in time, away from open-plan offices and software. Let's go to 1922, to a quiet patch of woods in the Swiss canton of St. Gallen, near the shores of Lake Zurich.
Oh, this is the story of Carl Jung.
Yes, the legendary psychiatrist Carl Jung. In 1922, Jung bought a piece of land in this incredibly quiet spot by the lake to begin building a retreat. He started with a basic two-story stone house he called the Tower. Over the years, he added to it. He built a private office, and he treated this room like a vault.
Like a fortress.
Exactly. He kept the key to this room on his person at all times. No one, not his family, not his colleagues, was allowed inside without his explicit permission. He would wake up at 7 in the morning, have a big breakfast, and then lock himself in that private office for 2 hours of undistracted, intense writing time. And we were talking complete isolation. There was no electricity in this tower. He relied on oil lamps for light and a fireplace for heat. He literally pumped his own water.
Now, from a modern perspective, it is very easy to look at that setup and think, oh, what a lovely, eccentric vacation home. Must be nice to be a rich doctor and have a lake house to chill out in.
Right, it sounds like a luxury.
But that completely misses the reality of what was happening. The context is absolutely everything here. Jung didn't build the Bollingen Tower as a vacation home. He wasn't going there to relax. In 1921, just a year before he started building, he had published a seminal book called Psychological Types.
And why was that book so important?
This book was a massive inflection point because it explicitly solidified the differences between his own theories and the ideas of his former mentor, Sigmund Freud.
Ooh, the drama.
Yeah.
And we have to understand what it meant to disagree with Sigmund Freud in the early 1920s.
It was huge. Freud was the undisputed king of the psychiatric world. Vienna was the center of the intellectual universe for this field, and Jung had been Freud's chosen crown prince. To break away from Freud wasn't just a polite academic disagreement. It was essentially career suicide.
It was an intellectual deathmatch. Jung was in absolute vicious dogfights with Freud's supporters. They were trying to discredit him, marginalize him, and basically destroy his reputation. To survive this and to establish his own new school of analytical psychology, Jung couldn't just be pretty good. He needed to produce a constant, undeniable stream of brilliant, groundbreaking articles and books. His mind had to be operating at the absolute peak of human capability.
And Jung was highly self-aware. He knew that his normal day-to-day life was not conducive to that level of genius. He lived in Zurich. He had a busy clinical counseling practice. He was constantly giving lectures. He was attending dinners. He had a family. His days were full of busyness.
Just constant demands on his time.
Right. He realized that the hectic city lifestyle, the constant demands on his attention, was fundamentally incompatible with the depth of thought required to defeat Freud's ideas.
He couldn't fight an intellectual war while constantly answering the door.
Exactly. He retreated to the woods not to escape his professional life, but to advance it. He was creating a physical fortress of discipline around his mind. He knew that to reach the depths of the human unconscious, he needed unbroken silence. He was protecting his attention as if his life depended on it, because his intellectual life did depend on it.
And we see this exact same pattern throughout history with people who produce massive, lasting value. Mark Twain wrote much of the adventures of Tom Sawyer in a completely isolated shed on a farm in New York. His family literally had to blow a horn just to get his attention for meals.
Wow, a horn.
Yeah. Woody Allen wrote 44 films on a manual typewriter, explicitly refusing to ever own a computer because he didn't want the distraction. Bill Gates famously took think weeks, where he would isolate himself in a cabin with just a stack of papers and books, entirely cut off from Microsoft employees.
It's definitely a common thread.
This isn't a coincidence. These people weren't just quirky. They were fiercely protecting their cognitive resources. But this leads to a critical question. If isolation and deep focus produce greatness, what happens to our brains when we don't protect them? What happens when we live in that state of constant partial attention, switching between tabs all day?
Well, this brings us to a really vital, mechanically fascinating concept from a business professor named Sophie Leroy. She studies the exact thing you just described. What happens when we constantly shift our attention from one target to another? Because that is the default state for most of us, right?
Oh, totally. We are typing a report, then we glance at an email, then we go back to the report, then we check a Slack channel, then we look at our phone.
Exactly. Leroy wanted to know what actually happens in the brain during those transitions. And she introduced a concept called attention residue.
Attention residue.
Yes.
Wow. It's such a visceral phrase. You can almost feel it just hearing the words.
You really can. Her research shows a fundamental flaw in how we think about multitasking. We tend to think our attention is like a flashlight. You shine it on task A, and then when you want to look at task B, you just point the flashlight over there, and 100% of the light instantly illuminates the new task.
But that's not true.
Not at all. Leroy found that the brain doesn't work like that. When you switch from task A to task B, your attention does not immediately or fully follow. A significant residue of your attention remains stuck, hovering over the original task.
Okay, let's play this out in a real scenario to make it concrete. You are writing a really complex strategy document. It requires all of your mental RAM. You hit a slight roadblock, so you quickly Alt-tab over to your inbox just to check.
Just a quick check?
Right. And you see an email from your boss that says, we need to talk about the budget this afternoon. You don't have time to answer it right now, so you Alt-tab back to your strategy document. What is happening in the brain?
Your brain has just opened a massive cognitive loop that it cannot close. Even though your eyes are looking back at the strategy document, a huge percentage of your neural processing power is now stuck in the inbox. It is running background simulations about what the boss wants. Is the budget being cut? Did I do something wrong? You are dragging this heavy, messy residue from the unresolved email right into the middle of your deep work.
You've essentially kneecapped your own cognitive ability.
Exactly. The science shows that multitasking is a total myth. The human brain cannot actually process two demanding tasks simultaneously. We aren't doing two things at once. We are just rapidly switching our attention back and forth.
It's exhausting.
It's like trying to cook a 5-course meal by taking 5 different pans on and off a single burner every 3 seconds. You aren't cooking faster. You are just making a massive mess and ruining the food. When we rapidly switch, we smear our attention, leaving thick cognitive residue everywhere. And this massively, demonstrably dampens our performance. You become slower, you make more mistakes, and you burn significantly more mental energy.
And it's not just about performance metrics. This is the part of the conversation that I think is the most profound. It's not just about doing worse work. It's about the emotional weight of focus. What happens to your actual experience of life?
Yeah, this goes incredibly deep.
There's a science reporter named Winifred Gallagher who spent 5 years intensely studying the neurology and psychology of attention. After all that research, she came to this incredible, sweeping realization. She said, life is the sum of what you focus on. The brain actually constructs our entire emotional worldview based almost entirely on where we place our attention.
Right, and this completely upends how most people traditionally think about happiness. We tend to believe that our circumstances dictate our happiness. If we get a promotion, we are happy. If we have a bad commute or a difficult boss, we are stressed. The external event happens, and our internal state reacts.
That's the default assumption.
But Gallagher's research points out that it's what you actually pay attention to within those circumstances that constructs your reality.
She uses a really stark, undeniable example. She talks about a cancer diagnosis. Now, objectively, a cancer diagnosis is a negative, frightening circumstance. If you focus entirely on the diagnosis, if you spend your day ruminating on the fear, the statistics, the medical procedures, your life, your moment-to-moment reality becomes dark, terrifying, and unbearable.
Which is entirely understandable.
Of course. But she points out that if, even with that exact same diagnosis hanging over you, you choose to focus intently on enjoying a beautifully made evening martini with a friend, or watching a sunset, or listening to a piece of music, your reality in that specific moment is genuinely pleasant. Your brain builds your world, your emotional state, from the raw materials of what you feed into your attention apparatus.
The raw materials are everything. So let's apply that profound truth to the modern workday. If you let your day be dictated by shallow work, by the rapid-fire checking of inboxes, by getting sucked into the outrage cycle of social media, by responding to snippy emails, by monitoring office politics on a Slack channel, what raw materials are you feeding your brain?
You are feeding it emergencies, demands, and trivial conflicts.
Yes. And as a result, your brain literally constructs a reality that is stressful, fragmented, and fundamentally trivial. Because the world represented by the modern inbox is not a pleasant world to inhabit. It is a world of endless obligation and minor crises. As Gallagher noted, drawing on older wisdom, the idle mind is the devil's workshop. When you lose focus, when your attention is untethered, human evolution dictates that your mind will naturally fixate on threats.
It wants to protect you.
Right. It will fixate on what could be wrong with your life, your career, your relationships.
But deep work provides an escape from that. When you engage in deep work, when you are lost in a complex problem, writing code, drafting an essay, or analyzing data, you are hijacking your own attention apparatus. Your concentration becomes so incredibly intense, so demanding of your neurological resources, that there is literally no attention left over to notice the trivial, stressful things. You don't have a mental RAM available to worry about office politics while you are writing a complex algorithm.
Which leads directly into the psychological research of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi.
Oh, the flow state guy.
Yes, the famous psychologist who coined the concept of flow. He spent his career trying to understand the impact of everyday behaviors on human happiness. And he found that the best moments in our lives, the moments of deepest satisfaction, do not happen when we are passive or relaxing. They usually occur when a person's body or mind is stretched to its absolute limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile.
Which is literally the exact definition of deep work.
Precisely. Deep work isn't just an economic tool to make you more valuable to your employer. It is philosophically, intrinsically rewarding. Our minds actually like the challenge of going deep. They crave order and complex challenge. A deep life is intrinsically a good life. It gives us a sense of meaning, craftsmanship, and quiet satisfaction that rapidly replying to emails simply never, ever will.
Okay, I am with you on the philosophy. I agree that deep work is economically valuable. I agree that it makes us happier and gives us meaning. But I want to introduce some friction here. I want to look at how people actually live.
Go for it.
Because a lot of people listening might be thinking, well, I completely understand the value of focus, but I can do both. I don't need to be a monk. I'll browse social media right now. I'll keep my email open on my second monitor. I'll enjoy the distraction and the connectivity. But when the big project comes, when the deadline really hits, I'll just flip the switch. I'll turn it all off, I'll hunker down, and I will laser focus. I can be distracted when it doesn't matter and focused when it does. But the science says otherwise, doesn't it? We can't just flip a switch.
The science is incredibly clear on this, and it is a very harsh, unforgiving truth. You absolutely cannot just flip a switch. The late Stanford communications professor Clifford Nass conducted fascinating, terrifying research on human behavior in the digital age. He specifically looked at people who multitask constantly, the heavy media multitaskers, versus those who rarely do. He wanted to see if the multitaskers were actually better at switching tasks, or if they had some cognitive advantage.
And what did he find? Did they have an advantage?
His findings were brutal. He discovered that people who multitask all the time literally cannot filter out irrelevancy. They are, in his exact words, chronically distracted. When they attempt to do a single task, they initiate much larger parts of their brain that are completely irrelevant to the task at hand. They are pulling in useless information. He literally called them mental wrecks.
Mental wrecks. That is a terrifying phrase coming from a Stanford researcher. That is not hyperbole. That is a clinical observation.
And the tragic part is the total lack of self-awareness. When an interviewer asked Nass if these highly distracted people realized what was happening to their cognitive abilities, Nass said that the people he studied continually claimed exactly what you just hypothesized. They claimed that when they really needed to concentrate, they could turn off everything and be laser focused. They believed they still had the power.
But the data showed it was a lie.
It was a total lie. They had developed habits of mind that made it biologically impossible for them to focus.
The myelin was gone.
Their brains were fundamentally rewired. By constantly feeding their brains a diet of quick, unpredictable, shiny information, they had wired their dopamine systems to crave novel stimuli. They became suckers for irrelevancy. If you spend your entire day feeling the slightest hint of boredom by pulling out your phone to check a feed, your brain learns that boredom is an emergency that must be instantly medicated with a screen.
Right.
So when you finally sit down to do that hard, deep work, which is inherently boring and frustrating in the beginning, your brain panics. You literally lose the physical capacity to focus when you want to. The tool has shaped the user.
Let's just sit with that reality for a moment. If we spend our days jumping between browser tabs, reacting to notifications, and swiping through feeds, we are not just wasting time. We are physically altering the structure of our brains. We are actively destroying our capacity to focus. The mental muscles are atrophying. So if we accept that reality, if we accept that good intentions are entirely useless here and that we can't just try harder to focus, how do we physically and practically build that discipline back? What do we actually do to rebuild the architecture of our minds?
That is the pivotal question of this entire deep dive, because you are exactly right. Good intentions are worse than useless here. They are a delusion. Willpower is a finite resource. It is subject to ego depletion. If you sit in an open office with your phone buzzing on the desk and you try to force yourself to focus through sheer willpower alone, you will eventually fail.
You just run out of gas.
You exhaust your willpower and you give in to the distraction. To get our focus back, we have to engineer our environment and our habits. We have to implement strict philosophies, rigid routines, and perhaps most uncomfortably, we have to learn to embrace boredom.
Let's break down the practical application. The research categorizes the scheduling of deep work into 4 distinct philosophies. And what I really appreciate about this framework is that it acknowledges reality. There isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. Your job, your family obligations, the culture of your industry, they all dictate what is realistically possible for you.
Let's walk through them, starting with the most extreme. The first is the monastic philosophy of deep work scheduling. As the name implies, this involves total, rigorous isolation. The goal is to maximize deep efforts by eliminating or radically minimizing all shallow obligations. You don't manage your email, you just stop using it.
A great example from the text here is the legendary science fiction author Neil Stephenson. If you go to his website right now to try and contact him, you won't find an email address. He's notoriously, intentionally impossible to reach electronically. And he wrote a brilliant essay explaining exactly why.
What did he say?
He essentially said, look, I have a choice. If I organize my life to get long, uninterrupted consecutive chunks of time, I can write massive, complex, lasting novels. If instead I allow myself to get interrupted a lot, if I try to be accessible, what will I produce? Instead of a novel that lasts forever, I will just produce a giant pile of emails that I send to individual persons.
It is a beautiful, unapologetic defense of the monastic approach. He understands that his supreme value to society is writing novels, and any energy spent on anything else is a theft from his core purpose.
But let's be real about the friction here. Most of us listening to this conversation cannot adopt the monastic philosophy. If I stop answering my emails forever and delete my Slack account, I'm not going to write a great novel. I'm going to get fired by Friday. My boss demands a certain level of accessibility. So if monastic is off the table for the average knowledge worker, what is the next option?
The next step down in extremity is the bimodal philosophy. This involves splitting your time completely into two distinct modes. You dedicate clearly defined, significant stretches of time strictly to deep pursuits, and you leave the rest of your time open to everything else. And the key is the clear division. During the deep time, you act like a monastic. You are unreachable. During the shallow time, you are fully accessible, answering emails, going to meetings.
We talked about Carl Jung earlier. He was fundamentally a bimodal worker. He would treat his time in Zurich at his clinic as his shallow, accessible time. He saw patients, he went to dinners. But when he went to the Bowling Tower, he was in deep mode. No one could reach him. Adam Grant, the Wharton professor and author, is another great modern example.
How does he do it?
At one point, he would stack all of his teaching obligations, his office hours, and his committee meetings into one semester. He was hyper-accessible. But in the other semester, he would essentially disappear. He would set out-of-office replies and isolate himself to write his books.
The bimodal approach is incredibly effective, but it still requires a massive amount of autonomy and flexibility. If you work a strict 9-to-5 corporate job, you probably can't tell your manager, hey, I'll see you in 3 weeks, I'm going into deep mode. Which brings us to the third option, and this is the one that is probably the most applicable for the vast majority of us listening today, the rhythmic philosophy.
The rhythmic philosophy.
Yes. This is about generating a rock-solid rhythm for your deep work that fundamentally removes the need for you to invest any willpower or energy in deciding when to do it. It transforms deep work from a daunting, sporadic event into a simple, predictable, regular habit.
And a classic, highly effective way to implement this is the chain method. You commit to doing a specific amount of deep work every single day, no matter what. And every day you do it, you put a big red X on a physical calendar. After a few days, you have a chain. At that point, your only job is simple. Don't break the chain.
It shifts the psychological burden entirely. But the text also mentions a really practical case study here, Brian Chappell. He was a doctoral candidate, but he also had a full-time, demanding job. He couldn't go monastic, and he didn't have the flexibility for bimodal weeks off. He had to adopt a rhythmic approach purely out of necessity.
Right, he couldn't wait for inspiration to strike, and he couldn't wait for a free afternoon because those never come.
Exactly. So he made a strict, uncompromising rule. He woke up, and he worked on his academic dissertation from 5:30 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. every single weekday, period. He did it before the rest of the world woke up, before the emails started arriving, before his 9-to-5 job even started. By making it a daily rhythm, he produced a phenomenal amount of complex academic writing without needing massive blocks of free days. He chipped away at the marble every single morning.
And then there's the final approach, the journalistic philosophy. This is named after journalists like the famous biographer Walter Isaacson, who are trained by the nature of their profession to shift into writing mode on a moment's notice. The journalistic approach is essentially squeezing deep work into any free gap in your schedule. If Isaacson had 30 minutes free before a meeting, he wouldn't check his email, he would pull out his laptop, drop instantly into the zone, and write a page of a book.
But we need to issue a massive flashing warning light here. The texts are very clear on this. The journalistic philosophy is absolutely not for the deep work novice.
Because of the attention residue we talked about earlier.
Exactly. If your brain hasn't been rigorously trained to focus, if you haven't built up the myelin, trying to switch instantly from a shallow, gossipy meeting into deep, complex thought will fail spectacularly. Your brain will be overwhelmed by the residue of the meeting. You will just sit there staring at a blank screen. Isaacson can do it because he had spent decades as a reporter training his brain to ignore distractions under tight deadlines.
Which brings us to the most critical part of this practical application. Because regardless of which philosophy you choose, whether you isolate like a monastic, block off mornings rhythmically, or try to be bimodal, you have to actually train your brain to handle the depth. You have to rehabilitate the muscle. And the most counterintuitive, uncomfortable advice the research gives on how to train your mind is this. You must learn to embrace boredom.
This is where the friction gets real. Because modern humans absolutely hate being bored. We are terrified of it.
We are. Think about standing in line at the grocery store. 10 years ago, you just stood there and looked at the gum. Now, if the line stops moving for more than 5 seconds, every single person reflexively pulls out a piece of glowing glass to look at strangers' opinions. We cannot tolerate the absence of novelty.
And a lot of people recognize this is a problem, but they try to solve it the wrong way. They think the solution is to take an internet Sabbath. They announce they are doing a digital detox for 1 day a week. They turn off their phones on Sundays, they go for a hike, and they think that cures them. But the psychology shows that this fundamentally does not work.
Why doesn't a detox work? It sounds healthy.
Think of it like a diet. If you eat a perfectly healthy, balanced meal 1 day a week, but you gorge yourself on absolute junk food the other 6 days, you are not going to lose weight. Your body will still be unhealthy. The same applies to the brain. If you spend 6 days a week fleeing the slightest hint of boredom by checking your phone the second you feel understimulated, your brain wiring remains addicted to novelty. A 1-day detox won't fix a neurology built on chronic distraction.
So what is the alternative? How do we rebuild the tolerance for boredom?
You have to flip the dynamic. Instead of scheduling occasional breaks from distraction, you have to schedule your distraction. You have to segregate it. The strategy here is to create specific blocks of time where you are allowed to use the internet or check your phone. And outside of those blocks, you are absolutely forbidden from using it, no matter how tempting or how quote-unquote productive the urge feels.
So if I schedule my next internet block for 3 p.m., and it's currently 2:30 p.m., and I am standing in line at the post office feeling incredibly bored, I have to resist the urge to pull out my smartphone.
Yes, you just have to stand there and suffer the boredom. And it will feel like suffering at first. Your brain will scream at you. It will come up with incredibly rational-sounding excuses for why you need to check your email right now. But those moments of resistance are where the actual growth happens. Those are concentration calisthenics. By forcing yourself to endure the boredom, you are training your mental muscles to tolerate an absence of novelty. You are teaching your brain that it does not get a dopamine hit just because it feels a slight lull in stimulation.
I love that phrase, concentration calisthenics. It reframes boredom. It's no longer a negative experience to be avoided. It is a literal workout for your brain. It's lifting weights. And there are 2 other specific, very intense exercises recommended for this mental gym. The first is called Roosevelt Dashes.
Named after Theodore Roosevelt.
Right. When Roosevelt was a student at Harvard, he had an insanely packed schedule. He was doing athletics, naturalism, socializing, writing books. To get his massive academic reading load done, he had to be ruthlessly efficient. He would carve out a specific time for a study session, he would estimate how long it should normally take him, and then he would artificially drastically reduce that deadline. He would give himself half the time, and then he would force himself to work with terrifying, blistering intensity to hit that artificial deadline. No daydreaming, no getting up for a coffee break, no looking out the window, just a barrage of relentless concentration.
It forces the brain out of its comfortable, wandering pace.
The recommendation is to try this once a week. Pick a clear task, give yourself a completely unreasonable deadline, and practice extreme intensity. And the other exercise is something called productive meditation.
This is a fascinating use of physical downtime. Productive meditation is where you take a period in which you are occupied physically but not mentally, like walking the dog, commuting on a train, or even taking a shower. And you focus your attention entirely on a single, well-defined professional problem.
Not just daydreaming.
No, it has to be highly structured. It could be outlining an article you need to write, or solving a specific strategy issue at work, you hold that problem in your mind. And just like in traditional mindfulness meditation where you focus on the breath, when your mind inevitably wanders to other things, like what you were having for dinner or a dumb comment you made 3 years ago, you gently but firmly bring your attention back to that single professional problem. You do the mental rep of pulling your focus back.
Okay, so we've talked about the deep work. We've talked about philosophies for scheduling it and rigorous exercises for training the brain to endure it. But we have to address the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
What about the rest of the day? The shallow work. Because we can't ignore our emails forever. We can't blow off all our meetings. We still have to function in a collaborative world.
Right. The deep work is the engine, but you still have to manage the exhaust. The final piece of the puzzle is what is called draining the shallows. You have to aggressively, relentlessly identify and minimize the shallow work in your schedule, or it will expand to consume your entire life. There's a great case study here involving Jason Fried and his software company, 37 Signals.
They do things very differently there.
They do. Fried ran a radical experiment where he gave his employees an entire month completely free of all shallow work. No status meetings, no memos, no required check-ins. Just an entire month to think and work deeply on new ideas and projects. And the result was a massive surge of incredibly valuable new projects that never would have happened in their normal interrupted environment. When people asked Fried, "How can you possibly afford to put your business on hold for a month just to let people mess around with ideas?" His answer was brilliant. He said, "How can we afford not to?"
He realized that the shallow work wasn't the business. The deep work was the business. But most of us don't run our own companies. We can't just decree a month off from meetings. We have to take control of our own days from the bottom up. And the method suggested for this sounds incredibly extreme at first glance. It is the practice of scheduling every single minute of your day.
Time blocking.
Yes. You take a physical notebook, you divide the page into blocks, and you assign every single minute of your workday a specific task. From 9 to 10:30, I am writing the report. From 10:30 to 11, I am processing email. From 11 to 12, I am in a meeting. Now, the pushback here is immediate. People say, well, I'm not a robot. Things come up, emergencies happen, I can't predict my day. But the point isn't to be a rigid robot. You can and should change the schedule as the day goes on and new things arise. You just draw a line through the old blocks and make new ones.
The point isn't rigid adherence to the initial plan. The point is intentionality.
Exactly. It forces you to pause before action and ask what makes the most sense to do right now, rather than just defaulting to whatever's newest in your inbox. It's like budgeting money. If you have an unlimited budget, you walk into a store and you buy a bunch of useless, shiny stuff because you aren't forced to choose. But if you have a strict limited budget of $50, you are forced to ruthlessly prioritize what actually matters. Time blocking is giving every single minute a job.
It forces you to treat your time with absolute respect. You start to see how little time you actually have, which makes you incredibly protective of it. And a powerful way to enforce this boundary is through a strategy called fixed schedule productivity. This is where you set a firm, immovable goal of quitting work at a specific time every day. Say 5:30 p.m., absolutely no exceptions.
If you know deep in your bones that you are shutting down your computer at 5:30 p.m., suddenly your entire day looks different. That invitation to jump on a quick brainstorm call at 3 p.m., you decline it because you know it will eat into the time you need to finish your actual work. You become fiercely protective of your hours, and you naturally, organically cull the shallow work to make room for the deep work that actually moves the needle.
And the boundary has to be real. When 5:30 hits, you have to initiate a complete shutdown. No checking email on your phone while you were cooking dinner. No just glancing at a project file before bed. The neurological research highlights that your directed attention centers, the parts of your brain that do the heavy lifting, require uninterrupted rest to recharge for the next day. If you keep dripping work into your evening, if you keep those cognitive loops open, you prevent your brain from ever fully recovering. You have to learn the discipline of being entirely done.
So I want to bring this back to you listening right now. We've covered an immense amount of ground. We've looked at the neurology of myelin, the economic reality of the metric black hole, the philosophy of Jung's tower. But theory only matters if it changes your behavior. So which philosophy fits your life? Are you a bimodal worker trapped in a rhythmic routine? Could you adopt Brian Chappell's approach and carve out an hour before the world wakes up? Could you try just one Roosevelt Dash this week to test the absolute limits of your intensity? Can you try standing in line today without looking at your phone, just to practice embracing the discomfort of boredom?
These are all practical tools, yes, but their ultimate purpose is not just to make you a more efficient worker bee. Their purpose is to serve the overarching theme of everything we have discussed in this deep dive. We are talking about taking profound, unapologetic responsibility for the shape of our lives. We are talking about reclaiming the raw materials that construct our reality.
And before we end, I want to introduce a final thought to mull over, something that builds on everything we've explored today. We live in a society that defines success as being highly visible. We are told from every angle that we need to be constantly in demand, hyper-connected, easily reachable, and publicly busy. We are told that visibility equals importance. But what if true, lasting legacy requires the exact opposite? What if the most profound, impactful thing you can do for the world is to be totally unreachable, silently and deeply doing the work that actually matters?
That is a really profound thought. The idea that visibility might actually be the enemy of value, that by disappearing into the depths of your own mind, by building your own version of the bowling tower, you are actually giving more to the world than you ever could by being constantly, trivially present in the shallows.
If there's one thing this conversation points to, it's that attention is not just a tool, it's a responsibility. Because what you focus on day after day quietly becomes your life. So the question is, what are you giving your attention to? If this is the kind of conversation you want more of, you can stay with us here at The Book Conversation.